The views expressed on this program are not necessarily those of WTJX, its board, staff, or underwriters.
On this episode of Comes with the Territory, we'll talk with the Executive Director of Catholic Charities Virgin Islands about how government funding delays are jeopardizing their ability to provide critical services to the territory's most vulnerable and the impact it's having on the community.
No money, no vote.
Protesters were in front of Government House recently demanding action on unpaid retroactive wages owed for decades. We'll explore the long-standing issue and how promises made by this administration have fallen short. Plus, lawmakers move forward a bill to raise the legal age for tobacco purchases to 21, while the legal age for drinking and purchasing alcohol remains at 18. We'll take a closer look at these age limits and the potential impact on public health, safety, and local business.
Senator Potter is attacking unionized employees.
Proposed legislation could change the makeup of the GERS board. We'll explore the debate over qualifications and union representation and what it means for GERS's future. And later, this week's panel joins the conversation to analyze these issues and more. Comes with the Territory starts now. Welcome to Comes with the Territory. I'm Marcelina Ventura Douglas. A key support system for the homeless across the territory has received just a fraction of its promised public sector funds for the year, putting essential services like meals, shelter, and outreach for those in need at risk. The strain on this nonprofit could have a serious impact on our most disadvantaged residents. Here's more. Catholic Charities Virgin Islands has long been a pillar of support for vulnerable populations across the territory. The faith-based nonprofit runs soup kitchens on St. Thomas, St. John, and St. Croix, serving hot meals Monday through Friday to the homeless and those in need. Beyond providing meals, the organization offers emergency shelter and transitional housing, giving individuals a safe place during critical times. Their outreach also includes mental health services, rental and utility assistance, and disaster relief, acting as a vital safety net for the community. But delays in promised government funding are now jeopardizing these essential services. During a recent Senate Committee on Housing, Transportation, and Telecommunications hearing, it was revealed that Catholic Charities Virgin Islands only received 18% of its expected public sector funds for fiscal year 2024.
So the total that we've received is $82,000 against an appropriated total of $449,000.
This shortfall is straining the charity's ability to continue providing food, shelter, and critical mobile outreach services to the homeless and vulnerable populations.
We're talking about essentially 50% of our budget. We still provide the other 50% on our own year in, year out. We're only talking about the 50% that we had been led to believe we were going to receive from public sector support.
And I hear your passion in your responses, and in respect to the soup kitchen and the street mobile outreach, I know the important work they do on a daily basis. We see it. We see the people that need those services on a daily basis.
I'm joined now by Andrea Shillingford, Executive Director of Catholic Charities Virgin Islands. Welcome to Comes with the Territory, Ms. Shillingford. Speak to me about how, the reduction in promised government funding has impacted operations so far.
Well, as can be expected, several of our programs have been affected. For example, the meals that we served, we try not to serve, as much as possible, not to serve too many canned goods. But recently, due to the fact that we've not received funding, one of the things that we've had to do is resort to serving canned goods. And you can imagine the meals are supposed to be nutritious and healthy. We try to serve healthy meals, but we have to make do this with whatever we have right now, whatever donations we receive from the public, whatever donations we receive from some good corporate citizens and individuals.
So, Ms. Schillenford, tell me, is this funding, is this the first year that this has happened, or is this something that has been happening?
It has been happening yearly on a regular basis. The funding is usually delayed, but this is the worst that it has been. Usually, sometimes
it's both the third quarter and the fourth quarter that you have not received.
we've not received the third and fourth quarter for 2 of the programs, and we've not received any of the funding for 2 of the other programs.
Wow, that's,
So
go ahead.
it leaves us kind of, especially when it comes to our bills, we now have to try to prioritize which bills we should pay and which bills we need to hold back, because we don't want to be giving anybody any checks that they cannot cash. So luckily for us, we do have a very good financial officer, and she will, on a daily basis, do a check as to what is the balance, what's the balance at the bank. And we sit together and we decide, okay, this week we can pay these bills. These are not so pressing, so we can hold back on those. Mm-hmm. So that's that. And then with our staffing, with our transportation, we have to cut back on. Sometimes the clients need to go out. We have to tell them we cannot do it this morning.
So, and that's what I want you to speak to me on. How is this impacting, the services that you provide to the clients and, the shortfalls that you're seeing, with the services that you're able to provide?
The biggest impact has been on us being able to provide rental assistance and utility assistance to individuals who need it. For example, you have a young mother who has just gotten approved for housing. She needs to pay first month and security, and she doesn't have the security deposit, and we would normally come in and try to assist with that. We cannot do it right now because the funding that we would have had to use for that, we've been having to use it to provide the most essential, which is sheltering and feeding. Mm-hmm. So the other services that we would normally provide, we have put a hold on some of them.
And let me ask you, if you continue to see this delay in, receiving the funding, how is that going to impact operations and the sustainability of Catholic Charities?
If it continues this way, eventually we would have, the final would be shutting the doors. We would start first with cutting down on the services that we provide. For example, for the fiscal year 24, we provided almost 93,000 meals throughout the territory and almost 12,000 nights of shelter. Mm-hmm.
Let me ask you, Ms. Schillenford, we're seeing, I think, if residents are paying attention, we're seeing a large increase in the homeless population. It's a lot of strain that we're seeing happening in the community. Are you seeing an increase in clients and then a subsequent reduction in your funding? Is that something that's happening?
We have been seeing an increase in the clients, and there are several factors that contribute to that. For example, people lost their jobs. Recently, we had a family. They were living couch surfing with another family. They were not on the lease. They had to leave. And it's difficult when you have children. And what we have seen recently is an increase in families coming to our doors for sheltering. Mm.
And do you think there are specific barriers or bureaucratic hurdles that are preventing and hindering you from being able to receive this funding?
I think it's not really bureaucratic, but I think it's more that people don't understand and appreciate the work that the nonprofits do, and it's something that's essential. It's something that we have to do. And can you imagine if we were to shut our doors and people don't understand and they don't take it seriously until it affects them personally? Now, you would have a homeless person taking up residence outside of the legislature. We will get a call. Somebody will try to push for us to get the funding. You have, if we close our doors, can you imagine chaos in the Virgin Islands? Because all of these people, the over 500 meals that we serve daily, these people are hungry. And if they cannot get the food from us, if they cannot get the meals from the nonprofits, what do you think they will do? They will rob, they will steal, they will do whatever they need to do to get the meals, because hunger is something that needs to be satisfied.
Yeah. Do you think that the current administration is giving enough attention to what's happening, with the challenges facing the vulnerable populations here in the territory?
The funding was allocated, and I think there's some of the senators who will call and say, did you receive your funding? And then they would make a call. But generally, I think they just, once the funding is allocated to them, that's it. The funding is allocated. There's no follow-up as to what is happening. Is the funding going out to where it's supposed to go to? Is the funding going to the nonprofits? So unless they would take the time to follow up on what's happening with the funding that was allocated, there's nothing being done, because we follow up
with human services. And how has that communication been with human services?
We have an excellent relationship. We have established an excellent relationship with human services. I can pick up my phone and call at any time. They make a lot of human services. Most of our referrals come from human services. So we have established that relationship. We work well with human services. And we provide whatever reports and
what's necessary,
or documentation that's necessary. We provide it to human services. And every time you call, they will tell you it's in the system.
Well, before we go, before we wrap up, I want you to tell me, how can the community assist Catholic Charities, very briefly?
The community can assist us by continuing to advocate for us, advocate with the legislature, advocate with the senators, advocate with other community persons for assistance. We can also, we are heavily dependent on donations, be it monetary or in kind. We do have a website that people can go to donate, or you can...
Give me that website.
www.catholiccharitesvi.org.
Okay, all right, awesome.
And they can also call the office 340-777-8518. Yeah, I think that's it.
Okay.
8518.
Thank you so much, Ms. Shillingford. Coming up, we'll hear from this week's panel. But first, let's take a look at the topics on the table.
Do you know the amount of retroactive wages that is owed to government employees?
The amount of retroactive wages owed to employees stemming back to 1989 is approximately $300 million.
In July of 2015, the Office of Collective Bargaining told lawmakers that the government owed approximately $300 million in retroactive wages.
We're here to stand up for something. We ain't gonna die for nothing.
Seeing no forthcoming payments, protesters rallied outside Government House on St. Croix in 2019 to demand attention be given to retroactive wages owed.
What is it that they are doing something about the retroactive pay that they owe us?
In his 2022 State of the Territory address, Governor Albert Bryan Jr. pledged to address this issue once and for all.
We are committed to paying down at least 15%
or $26 million at least in retroactive wages in this current fiscal year. I am going further than that because I don't want you to believe it's an election ploy. I am also proposing that we commit to plan to pay the remaining balance of what is owed at annual installments of at least $25 million every single year until the full obligation is repaid.
Later that year, Bryan upped his pledge in retroactive payments for the 2022 fiscal year.
We closed out fiscal year 22 strong, no pun intended, with a budget surplus. This allowed us to pledge some $40 million towards the payment of retroactive wages owed to government employees and retirees going back to 1990.
Then in October of 2023, Government House announced that Bryan approved a bill authorizing the administration to pay out $25 million in fiscal years 23 and 2024 as part of its plan to continue payment of retroactive wages owed to eligible government employees. But earlier this year, it was revealed during a Senate Finance hearing that only a fraction of the $25 million allocated for fiscal year 2023 was actually spent on retroactive wages.
Of the $25 million that was appropriated for retroactive payments in fiscal year 2023 per Act 8770, OMB processed the release for the full $25 million. However, only $2.5 million has been paid to date.
None of the $25 million appropriated for retro wages for fiscal year 24 had been paid as of the close of the fiscal year, and there were no appropriations in the recent fiscal year 2025 budget for retroactive wages. Therefore, protesters were back in front of Government House on St. Croix as they had been in 2019, this time to call attention to the government's broken promises for retroactive wages.
The protest was because the governor failed and the legislature failed to put any money in the budget this year for the retirees to get paid for money that they owe from 1990. He robbed the $23 million from last year. The budget went down this year, they ain't sent back no money in it. He put a $25 million for this year, so that's $48 million that he owed the retirees.
Lawmakers recently moved forward a bill to raise the legal age for purchasing tobacco products from 18 to 21. The Committee on Health, Hospitals, and Human Services on October 2nd approved Bill number 35-0289, aiming to align local law with federal regulations. The change is expected to reduce access to tobacco products for teens and young adults, a group seen as particularly vulnerable to nicotine addiction. That's according to the bill's sponsor, Senator Ray Fonseca.
Nicotine addiction is particularly strong in adolescents and young adults as their brains are still developing, making them more vulnerable to its effects than adults. Raising the age at which young people first try or begin using tobacco can help reduce the likelihood of nicotine addiction.
Health officials vowed support for the measure, highlighting its potential to lower smoking initiation rates and prevent long-term tobacco-related health issues.
Fewer tobacco-related illnesses would result in healthier communities and lower long-term healthcare costs.
The Department of Licensing and Consumer Affairs also backed the bill, citing the need to ensure local compliance with the federal age requirement, which was implemented nationwide in 2019.
This legislation, commonly referred to as Tobacco 21 or T21, was recognized as a critical step in keeping tobacco products out of the hands of young people. Since the enactment of T21, the FDA has conducted compliance checks on businesses across the territory, resulting in some 392 warning letters or citations, some with civil penalties. Amending our local statute to align with federal law will further protect our youth from the dangers of nicotine addiction, help prevent long-term health issues, curb access to tobacco products, and provide economic benefits to the territory.
If Bill 35-0289 ultimately passes, DLCA would be responsible for informing and educating the territory's tobacco retailers and wholesalers about the updated law, increasing enforcement efforts, and updating signage requirement to reflect the new age restriction of 21.
The Department of Licensing and Consumer Affairs does have, in its current configuration, the enforcement capacity to do this, to address this measure. We usually work very closely together with the Virgin Islands Department of Health and their enforcement team.
During a meeting last month, the Government Employees Retirement System Board of Trustees weighed in on proposed legislation that would change the composition of the board. Bill number 35-0307, sponsored by Senator Milton Potter, aims to replace the 2 board members nominated by the Central Labor Council once their terms expire with 2 active members of the Government Employees Retirement System who must be elected through a process determined by GERS. One must be a resident of St. Croix, and the other must be a resident of the St. Thomas-St. John district. The bill also aims to ensure that all GERS board members, except the Director of Personnel, meet specific professional qualifications, such as having at least 5 years of experience and a bachelor's degree in fields like finance, law, or accounting. This change removes the previous exemption that applied to the Central Labor Council appointees. Trustees Nellen Bowery and Chairman Dwayne Callwood were in support of the proposed legislation.
I don't have any problem with that. I think the retirees are represented, so I guess we'll just be having the active members representing.
Yeah, exactly. The retirees get to elect their representatives, so it's just to bring some parity for the active government before.
However, Trustee Andre Dorsey, who was appointed to the GERS board through the Central Labor Council, opposed the bill. He warned that the change could allow any government employee, even high-ranking officials like the governor's chief of staff, to occupy seats on the GERS board, thereby diminishing the representation of unionized employees. Dorsey believed the Central Labor Council should have an opportunity to weigh in.
You want the Central Labor Council to not have a nickel in the dime of this process. I don't think that's right. They represent a certain segment of this population. I think Senator Potter is attacking the unionized employees.
The board ultimately voted 3-1 in favor of supporting the bill, with Trustees Bowery, Callwood, and Leona Smith voting in favor, Trustee Dorsey opposing, and Trustees Vincent Liger and Ronald Russell absent. Joining me on set to provide insight on these issues are former Senator Justin Harrigan and criminal defense attorney Melanie Turnbull. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
And from our St. Croix studio, let's welcome Jamila Russell, host of the long-running political radio show Just Jamila on WSTX AM 970. It's great to have you here.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
Okay, before we dive into the topics of the day, I want to get your thoughts on the featured discussion you heard earlier. Jamila, I know you follow these issues closely. Is this a chronic problem for all the nonprofits in the territory that rely on promised government funding like Catholic Charities?
Unfortunately, you've heard this discussion before, and yes, it is an issue. However, I think that there's more to the issue, and I think when you create a nonprofit, it is the expectation that the nonprofit will do some level of revenue generation on their own. And we've found, and you've seen over the years, where some nonprofits become wholly and totally dependent on government resources to survive. And you don't find that they go for private donors, corporate sponsors, and the like. They go for maybe, like Ms. Shillingford said, donations of food items if they have a food drive, but there isn't any real income producing measures that the nonprofits do. And nonprofits play an important part in that they provide a supplement to government service that the government can't provide, and they're needed. But in the conversation, we have to have the discussion where these nonprofits do some level of fundraising for their organization and go after grant opportunities that are provided to nonprofits across the nation.
Yes, I hear you on that, Jamila. Attorney Turnbull, tell me, do you think that the repeated delays that, in getting local funding to nonprofits year after year kind of says where the priorities of the administration lie?
To be candid, I don't know if it shows a priority of where the administration lies as much as where the administration's bank account is. And so when you have a situation like that, I think the central government will be looking to take care of the central government first, rather than these auxiliary organizations. And to what Ms. Russell indicated, these organizations, when you're noticing a pattern of this delay, it would behoove them to, put more effort into bringing on a director of fundraising whose full-time and only job is to find alternate sources of revenue. So I agree completely with what she's saying.
Mr. Harrigan, I want to get your take on this. Why do you think that this happens year after year?
Well, they seem to not care about these nonprofits. They, I mean the government. The government, nonprofits, I see them just about every day that I'm in the street, especially Catholic Charities. They feed people every day, and there's quite a line. So I think the government needs to pay a little more attention to those nonprofits that are viable and helping these folks who don't have a means to support themselves.
Mm-hmm. And I do think that, they end up kind of providing and filling that shortfall, Attorney Turnbull, where, say, maybe human services may not be able to fill, they kind of fill that gap.
They do. Like they absolutely do good work. And there's something that Ms. Shillingford said that really, really stuck with me, which was, if we don't get this funding, the rest of the community will feel the absence of what we actually do provide.
Definitely.
And so it's a very delicate balance in being able to run the government with the funds that are available for you, and also, assisting,
that tightrope.
assisting with nonprofits that do vital work for our society.
Definitely, I hear that. Let's shift to another crucial issue impacting our community. Outstanding retro payments. Mr. Harrigan, you are a part of the 31st legislature when, collective bargaining said that over $300 million was owed. Speak to me, the debt has decreased, right? But has the administration maybe made too large of a promise to be able to pay the retirees these funds?
I would not know whether or not they made too big a promise, but they have to address what's owed. It's recognized by the administration that these monies are owed to the employees and retirees. So they should make some effort to bring that debt down, and not just let it roll on and on, just kick a can down the road. They should make some effort to pay those bills.
Jamila, I want to go to you. I think that this issue when it comes to retro is something that predates many of us. This is a generational issue. Is the government justified in prioritizing immediate expenses during this cash crunch while paying only a fraction of what's appropriated for retro payments?
Well, in a perfect world, you would want what's appropriated by the legislature to be paid out by the executive branch. However, we must recognize that if the government doesn't make good on their biweekly payroll costs, then you would have payless paydays. And so it's the presumption that the Commissioner of Finance and the Director of OMB and the other members of the governor's financial team, that they meet and they discuss what is collected. Because a budget is built on anticipated revenues, but the government has to actually collect the money. The money has to be in the bank account so that it can be spent. And if the government isn't collecting the money that's owed, then you have to manage the cash that you have on hand. And they're going to manage the cash to make sure that they cover priority number one, which is meeting the payroll obligations every 2 weeks. And, there's some questions and concerns about how the government spends money, but we have to make sure that the government employees get their paychecks every 2 weeks. And so the short answer to that, the short answer to that is we wish that we collected revenues and we had the money in the bank to pay the appropriations out, but it appears that there's a cash management issue at hand.
Yeah. Attorney Turnbull, do you think it's fair, some of the criticism that the Bryan administration has been receiving, as far as it pertains to the broken promises, but then also just coming in and meeting this large debt and being able to kind of get these funds, especially, we're hearing frequently on some of the money issues that the government is having?
Well, the buck always stops at the top, right? So it's not okay for someone to say, well, this problem has been here forever. It's going to be every single person's job that we elect to solve all of the problems. But I do think that there is some unfairness as far as though nothing has been done. We know that they've created, the retirees portal in this administration. They have paid down. They paid $7.7 million last year. And so there are steps. We just heard about the $2.5 million that they also paid. And so I think because it's not coming in large chunks of $25 million and $40 million that was promised, it kind of gives the appearance as though nothing has been done. So some of it is unfair, but I think when you're a leader and you make a promise and then you can't fulfill it, then you have to take the backlash that comes your way.
Yeah. And, Mr. Harrigan, you were in the legislature. The legislature appoints those funds. They appointed that $25 million. The government chose to, pay out that $2 million, use the remaining for anything else. As a former lawmaker, when you hear that, what does that say to you?
It means that the legislature, the senators have to pay more attention as to how the monies are being spent. Because once they allocate the money and it's earmarked, it should be spent for its intended purpose and not just something else that may seem to be important to the administration versus the people that are owed the money.
And before we continue, Jamila, I want to go back to you. What do you think can be done to ensure that these funds appropriated for retro payments are actually, they're given to those people that are owed?
So just a point of clarification, the legislature doesn't allocate, the legislature appropriates the fund. And the appropriations come on what you anticipate you're going to collect in revenues. What actually happens is revenues need to be collected. After the revenues are collected, the director of OMB then allocates the fund to government agencies for uses. So the problem isn't the legislature staying on top of how money is spent. The problem exists in the collection of revenues. If you don't collect the money, you can have money on paper, but if you don't have the money in the bank, you can't pay the bills. And that's the issue. The collection of government revenues in those budget categories, or those revenue categories rather, that you anticipate that you're going to collect revenues from. And that's the property taxes, any taxes, because the government can only generate revenues from taxes or bond issuances or going or charging fees. So if you're not paying your business license fees, if you're not paying your property taxes, the government doesn't have the money to be able to then pay its expenses.
And that's something that I do want to acknowledge is that, we have heard that we do have a collections problem, with the government as well too, but largely before we continue, Jamila, I want to ask you, because this has been a generational issue, do you think at any point in time the government will ever, truly be able to get up to date on paying these retroactive payments?
Well, it depends on, who's in leadership and what their priorities are. We've had a large influx of money where you could have backfilled the budget for various projects, and you could have been creative with the revenues that have come in. But again, it depends on the priority of who sits in government house. The governor has his priorities, he has his agenda, and I think that it's a problem that can be solved. No problem is solved overnight, but there isn't anything that in the Virgin Islands we can't accomplish with hard work and just being determined and have that be a priority. And so it just needs, everybody needs to come to the table and determine that this is a priority and then work towards getting it done.
And Attorney Turnbull, I want to ask you, what do you think the governor or the administration can do to kind of restore some of that trust, because you weren't able to fulfill your word?
I think, like what you said, by fulfilling their word, right? The only way to gain trust is to make a promise and then keep it. And so in order to do that, I think the best path forward would be to make conservative promises that you know at the end of the day you can fulfill. But it all goes back to what Ms. Russell has been saying. If they don't have the money in their account, there's not much that they can do. And so it's a triaging process. And, it seems that retroactive pay just never meets the triage.
It's going to continue. It's going to continue. But, I want to turn now, you have that law background. We've seen now this legislation to change the tobacco age from here in the territory from 18 to 21 to come in line with federal standards, but we're not changing the alcohol law from 18 to 21. Speak to me, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that a lot of what went into changing the nicotine rather than alcohol, I think it's economical. So one, we see all of the health disadvantages of smoking and having vaping and the new mechanisms that they have geared towards younger children. And there's a lot of research on how nicotine is just cancerous. I mean, there's just no benefits to it. And so it's an easier sell to say, okay, well, we'll just bump it up to 21. I would have liked to see if they did any kind of economical studies as far as the various retailers here and if it has any impact on our sales with tourism, because, we're duty free. And so a lot of people come to buy certain products in bulk. So I would have liked to seen whether there was an in-depth discussion about that. But I think it was an easier sale because of the health benefits.
Yeah.
I think alcohol is different. I think there is this perception that alcohol is safer, and people come down here because we're open container, open carry jurisdiction, and so I think there would be a lot more pushback on any kind of bill for that. But in order for this bill to really work, it really is enforcement. But I was really happy to hear DLC acting commissioner saying that they have the capacity to make sure that they're enforcing this new requirement, and it's in line with all the other states, and so it makes sense. And to be honest, I think that we already do a good job as far as nicotine is concerned in the Virgin Islands. I just went to Europe and I forgot that people smoke cigarettes because I smell cigarette smoke everywhere.
Yes.
Down here is not as bad, but this is just one step further to kind of like put the nail in the coffin.
Yeah. And, Senator Harrigan, if you were in the legislature, would you be a supporter of this, upping the age?
I would. Yeah.
Now, moving now to alcohol, though, why do you think we've kept the legal age at 18 here in the territory rather than 21 as it is in the mainland?
Well, it's economics to start with. I would figure that with the tobacco, you would have a lot of pushback from the merchants, but I haven't heard of it. And the alcohol, it is part of what people come here for, as Ms. Turnbull stated, and it is not as injurious to one's health as tobacco is. I used to be a smoker.
Oh, really?
But I went into the army, I smoked there for a little while, and then I came back and I just didn't smoke again. I never really missed it.
Okay.
But the drinks, every once in a while you stop by, you get a drink.
You get a little drink.
Yeah, so I think that with the tobacco, it's okay for now. Maybe the drink, they'll probably raise it up to maybe 19 or 20.
Well, I want to ask Jamila, do you think at any point here in the territory that we're ever going to increase that legal drinking age from 18 to 21?
Well, I don't think that there's ever been any study that's been done that says that people come to the Virgin Islands because we have our legal drinking age is 18. I think that's an added plus they find out when they get here. I think that all of our promotion, especially from the tourism sector, we market ourselves as sun, sand, and beach. I've never seen us say, have a marketing campaign that says, come to the Virgin Islands, you can drink at 18. That being said, I think that it was myopic of the proponent of the legislation, not to have just done one fell swoop where you address all of these issues. We have seen in a territory where people have lost family members to drunk drivers. I've never heard of anybody losing their life to somebody smoking a cigarette. The harm that people who smoke is to themselves and to those people who may live in their immediate household that have secondhand contact to tobacco. However, drunk drivers kill, and their potential to kill and harm extends far beyond themselves. Also, I think, sometimes it's an election year and people have to have, legislation to campaign upon. But, just recently, the legislature amended the Adult Cannabis Use Act that raised the access for cannabis products from 18 to 21. And that could have been tacked on as a simple amendment. I think sometimes we squander government resources for the sake of having a soundbite and for having a bill with your name attached as the primary sponsor. But I do think that we should be able to raise the drinking age in the territory and for the sake of the safety and well-being of all, have all of those resources be available at 21, not at 18.
Not at 18. Okay, I hear you on that, Jamila. So we're moving now to GRS. The proposal now to have active government employees. I want to ask you, Senator Harrigan, for them to elect their representatives very much similar to that of how the retirees elect their representatives. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it would be a good idea to allow some of these persons to be on the board.
Mm-hmm. Speak to me. I mean, I think Trustee Dorsey, viewed it as kind of an attack on the unions. Do you think it's an attack on the unions?
I don't think so. Mm-hmm. No. It's giving an opportunity for other members to have a say. Mm-hmm. And they should have those persons who are being affected by this system to have a say.
Yeah. And, Attorney Turnbull, one of the things also was just about whether or not now, if, say, maybe the governor's chief of staff now will be able to run to be one of those representatives. But we're looking more at the qualifications as well, too, now. What do you think now that making sure that those representatives have those qualifications, do you think it's going to kind of maybe help better shape what the board looks like?
I think it'll definitely narrow, I think, what the board looks like. Those are very specific qualifications that they have listed out in the bill. And so I do think that it creates a situation in which individuals who have a direct interest in the GRS board and in the GRS outcomes may not have an opportunity to be at this seat, but at the same time, because of the sensitive nature of what GRS entails in investments and making decisions for the entire government, I do think it's important for them to have the similar skill sets and experience that is listed out. Some of the skill sets, I didn't see how they were translatable at all to being on a GRS board, but it just really seemed like get as much educated people as possible and then throw them on the board, even though their skill sets may not fit completely. Because they had, if you are in medicine or real estate, and I'm finding it hard to figure out why someone with a background in medicine would make a better candidate.
Largely, do you think now that having those people who maybe have those similar background kind of shuts it off from having maybe someone who may have a unique perspective, and that from those outside experience, maybe, on the job experience rather than going to school, because you can also get that same kind of education in the workforce.
You can, but it's really tough. I think that the GERS board, because of what they deal with, I, as a GERS retiree or active member, would want the decision makers to have a certain baseline level of qualification and skill set. And unfortunately, that does preclude a lot of people from being able to be on the board. I don't think they should have precluded everyone, though. I think that's the issue I take with the changes in the bill.
Mm-hmm. Jamila, I want to go to you. What do you think? Do you think that these proposed changes can reduce the influence of rank and file workers in pension decisions?
Well, I think that a couple of things with the legislation. First and foremost, I don't think necessarily that, for clarification, not all government employees are members of the union. So I don't think that you have to be, there must be union representatives on the board. That's one. Number two, education does not equate to intelligence. And so while somebody may have a piece of paper, it doesn't translate to making sound, rational, intelligent decisions. Two. Three, I think that having employees elect members is the right way to go. However, I do think there must be a baseline. However, the baseline cannot be a piece of paper. It must encompass qualifications that include experiences. And for the record, the GRS has actuaries and they have consultants. So the board doesn't have to have the necessary experience in an investment portfolio or in actuaries coming up with scenarios. They pay consultants to come up with that. You just have to have a level of common sense to determine whether or not what's being presented to you makes the best sense for the people that you're asked to represent, and then make a reasonable decision with the information that you're provided. They don't do the work. They have consultants that do the work for them. So I think tying it to having a degree in specific fields limits the potential to have very qualified people that have the intelligence that's required to make those decisions serve on the board.
And very briefly, Jamila, let me ask you, do you think that there should be safeguards that are put in place for, high-ranking officials, from skewing the makeup of the board?
I think that high-ranking officials pay into the GRS system. I think that just because, I work in the legislature, and I always tell people, you can't make legislation for who currently sits. You have to think about the greater good. And, the high-ranking officials, they pay into the GRS system. They want to make sure that their investment is sound as well. They don't want the GRS to go belly up. So I don't think precluding anybody from serving on the board is rational or sound.
Okay. Now, I want to revisit an issue that we covered in previous episodes, and this is the rise of unregulated transportation services in the territory. We featured comments on past shows from the owners of VI Uber and VI Hail, and with both of them acknowledging that they operate without a license due to gaps in the current system. Recently, Monroe Sanderson, the owner of VI Uber, was cited by the Department of Licensing and Consumer Affairs. He recorded the encounter and posted it on social media. We're going to play a portion of that recording now.
Yeah, man, I have to pull up on DLC and I'm going to deal with these dudes, but they're going to write me citation. That man crazy.
This one here is yours. If you choose to contest it, there's an email address here, and the date is here. You can be able to appear.
One news flash, right? The revolution will never stop.
That's all right.
Whether it's me, whether it's them, whether it's VI Rider, whatever it's who it is, the revolution will never stop. It's already a virus in the sky, boss. It's something I'm going to have to deal with, you check?
And it's not, it really isn't a problem.
The government going to have to deal with it.
And
either create the department like your job is, you check? Or everybody going to keep doing this thing here so on the side.
And that's the, we're going to address it.
And I you just keep getting the problem and getting the problem and getting the problem until I you deal with the situation that I don't want to deal with.
Hold on, sir. I'm grateful that you recounted the fact that you've been here and we spoke with you. You protect this.
And guess what? You're still dinging to me how many times I come in here to see you.
When you come, then we
and when you tell me the last time I've been in here, oh, me going to send no officer for you because you ain't violated nothing. Somebody don't call your phone and tell it to buy.
$500 penalty?
Listen, you need to.
No.
You want your money now?
No, what you complain.
I need to know what.
You want your money now?
No, can I see that?
Because this government broke. I want your money now?
Give me that, please. Can I have that? Let me have it.
Give that to her.
Let me see. $500 penalty.
Somebody don't call your boss.
Under what
I do
statute?
this club.
I just need.
All of you guys club.
It's listed.
What statute?
It's listed.
In the back?
Yes. No, in the front.
All right, Mr. Harrigan, I want to go to you. We're seeing this conversation as it comes to taxi, it comes to ride share. Do you think the slow creation of regulations in letting unlicensed, services like VI Uber, like VI Hail, the slow creation of those regulations, is that allowing those businesses to thrive?
It is, and it should be addressed. If they're going to operate, they should have a license. That's my position on that.
Same question to you, Attorney Turnbull.
Yes, and I think the liability is what I'm thinking about. When you are in an industry and you don't have any licensing, there is really there's not a lot of relief for individuals that may be in utilizing those services. But at the same time, what is the difference between a gypsy taxi? And so we have to think about whether or not we can come into the 21st century by making sure that we roll out these regulations in a timely fashion. I think we see it across the board. There's legislation proposed, and then the regulation component just lags and lacks behind. And so I would like to see a VI Uber or a VI Hail, and I would like to see the mechanisms for them to get the licensing, because I do believe that what they would capture compared to gypsy taxi, I gave the example of a gypsy taxi, but that's not a centralized company or organization that has a big, broad reach. So it's not the same. It's just a quick reference. But because of their broad reach, I believe that the regulations should be promulgated so that we can have the licensing mechanism for these organizations.
I want to ask you, we saw here in the clip, former Senator Nellie O'Reilly that was there. What do you think her presence there, says maybe about her public image and, her possible chances for her writing campaign that she's currently, going with?
I don't know. I don't have an opinion on her presence there. I'm not sure what her angle was, but I don't want to opine
speculate
on that. Yes.
Okay, Jamila, I'm going to ask you possibly to speculate. Could Nellie Rivera's presence at the situation with Johnson, could it possibly hurt her writing campaign given his behavior?
I mean, in our district, sometimes, we like the rah-rah. However, I think it sends a message to me as somebody who wants to be a lawmaker that you're not concerned with making sure the laws that currently exist are complied with. And, the law does need to be changed. And I think that the 35th legislature, I know that there has been a proposal to address some issues with what's happening in the Taxi Cab Commission. But the proper way to do that is to lobby. If you want a law change and you want an industry introduced, you don't go to the Taxi Cab Commission. They're not the lawmakers. You lobby your lawmakers to say, hey, we need this amendment to the law so that we can operate legally and have that law amended so that then regulations can be adopted to manage the industry. Because what happens now, to Attorney Turnbull's point, is that you have a liability issue. If they get in an accident, if you get injured using their services, what insurance is going to pay? If they're operating an illegal business, absence of law, they're operating illegally.
Yeah.
And so I do believe that the issue needs to be addressed. And until the issue is addressed, you lobby. That's what people do in Congress. You lobby to change the law. You just don't operate outside of the law because a law doesn't exist.
Yeah, and because the law doesn't exist, how do you think that lack of rideshare rules is affecting enforcement with DLCA?
Well, I think that the Department of Licensing and Consumer Affairs can cite them for operating without a business license, and they have to be creative in how they fine them. And additionally, there must be some penalty and for not obeying the current laws of the land. And if that's, you don't get to come in the first wave when this gets rolled out, if it gets rolled out, but there must be some penalty. You can't continue to have people operating outside of the law and then you reward bad behavior. It sets a bad message and it sends a bad message to our children. And we're a nation of laws and laws need to be followed.
Yes. Mr. Harrigan, I want to ask you, does the government's delay in kind of setting up these rideshare guidelines reflect a bigger problem on the priorities in addressing, some of the business needs that we need here in the territory?
I would think so. The situation comes to the attention of the authorities. They have to figure out whether or not it is legal. If it's not, then they have to get some kind of rules to protect the right in public and not just turn their back. Like someone said, if you have an accident, you need to have insurance to cover that person. So the government has to act a lot faster because of the way things are happening here in the territory. And people are just taking advantage of not having a law that would require them to do something.
Yeah.
So I would believe that the government needs to be a little more aggressive in dealing with these situations.
Yeah. And Attorney Tillman, you said similar, are we being left behind?
Yes. In the sense of rideshare, we're being left behind, right? But I'm not somebody that is a proponent of because they have it in the States or because they have it here, we have to have it too. I'm not one of those. But I think with the big push from the Lieutenant Governor's office and having all of the roads mapped out, we saw all the trucks when they were moving for the past couple of years and doing all of the mapping of the addresses. I think it's time for us to have rideshare. But as my co-panelists have said, you have to go through the proper mechanisms, right? Because if there is an accident, if a driver does something to harm, not even an accident, but just does something to harm, like where do you get relief? How do you get relief? You can't, the individualized relief, you may be capped because we don't know what type of insurance they're carrying. We don't know the cap of their insurance. And so it's almost like you're getting in a car, getting in an accident with just a regular citizen in the community. We don't know how much coverage they have. And the reason why you have to have the laws and the regulations is because they can set those bare minimums of what you need to carry in order to be carrying passengers.
I'm definitely curious to know exactly what their coverage is. That's definitely for sure. But that's all the show that we have for today. Be sure to tune in next Sunday at 1 p.m. for an all-new episode of Comes with the Territory. In the meantime, for your news updates, tune into the WTJX newsfeed on weekdays at 5 p.m. on 93.1 or by downloading the WTJX app. I'm Marcelina Ventura Douglas. From all of us here at WTJX Channel 12, take care.